We will be in Ephesians chapter 4 this morning, beginning in verse 7. We stopped in verse 6 last time. And there's a little detail in here that originally I was not going to spend a whole lot of time with, and we'll probably still not spend a lot of time with it. But I also didn't want to gloss over it quite as much, and I'll tell you when we get there. There's kind of a thrust, I think, of this section, and then one really weird piece. And so it's probably worth mentioning as we go. Ephesians chapter 4, we'll start in verse 7. But grace was given to each one of us according to the measure of Christ's gift. So we get this grace, but we get it in different measure. And I don't know exactly what that looks like or how that works, but it seems what Paul is telling us here is that some of us are in need of a little more grace than others. And I probably am pretty high on that list myself, so I don't mind pointing that out. But what we need to know as we think of grace coming across in different measure is that it's also coming across in the correct measure. Because if this is the measure of Christ, we can know that we are not short on grace and we're not long on grace. We have got exactly the amount of grace that we're supposed to receive. And so God has set up through Christ this system where we will receive something that we are just completely undeserving of. When we deserve punishment, when we deserve something that is coming our way as a result of what we've done, instead what we get is grace. And God has arranged for that for us. And then in verse 8 it says, "Therefore it says, when he ascended on high, he led a host of captives and he gave gifts to men." Now, I will have to tell you, as we're going through Ephesians, this seems so different than anything else that we have seen to this point, that immediately I kind of step back and think, okay, clearly we've got the quotation marks here he's quoting, but the struggle is what he is quoting as we go back to the Old Testament to look for it. This doesn't look exactly like what we find in the Old Testament. And so in the Old Testament, in Psalm chapter 68 and verse 18, it says that you ascended on high, leading a host of captives in your train and receiving gifts among men, even among the rebellious, that the Lord God may dwell there. Now, maybe I should have tipped you off so you could start looking for it, but I didn't want anybody to just be scanning the slide that much. There is a big difference between these two verses, or maybe a small one. It's one word specifically that comes to be different here, and it is the idea of receiving gifts or giving gifts. In the Psalm version, in the Old Testament, God is receiving gifts from his people, and in the New Testament version, you've got God giving gifts. And I don't know exactly what to make of that. There are a lot of theories on this. This, by the way, is one of two. We'll spend a little more time on the second one. There are a lot of theories on this as to what exactly Paul is trying to say here. I think as we look further into Ephesians, especially in this part of the chapter, we will see a lot of the idea of gifts that God gives us. And I think Paul is trying to make the theological statement that along with grace, we receive gifts that we don't deserve, because it should be as it was back in Psalm 68. We should be the one bringing God gifts, because after all, he's deserving of that, and we're not. And yet what God has done is he has turned that around. And so he has turned that into something where he is going to give us gifts, even though they may be undeserved, because God is one who gives. God is a giver of gifts. And so he takes this thing that would be kind of familiar from the Old Testament, and some of the argument within commentaries is, was this something that was already known, or is this just kind of Paul's take on it? And no one really knows. But clearly, Paul believes that God is one who, although he should be the receiving of gifts, he's here giving gifts. And then verse 9, where it gets really interesting. And it's in parentheses, so I had license to skip over this completely, but I decided not to. So in verse 9, it says, in saying he ascended, what does it mean but that he also descended into the lower regions, the earth? So here's the question. What in the world is he talking about when he says he descended? And there are, as there are with so many things in Scripture, especially when they come in parentheses or where they come kind of confusing in the midst of something else, there are a lot of ideas of what this could be. The first one being what we may see in the New American Standard version of it. In the New American Standard, you see there at the end, it says, into the lower parts of the earth. And just to remind us, I'll skip back to ESV. You've got the lower regions, comma, the earth, as if lower regions is something that's describing earth. New American Standard, you've got the lower parts of the earth like it's a place, I guess, within the earth, which immediately takes people to the idea of Hades. And part of the connection here with Hades, and we're not going to go too far on this tangent, but I think it's worth mentioning. Part of the idea with Hades is if you look at 1 Peter 3, and we won't read it this morning, but 1 Peter 3, we like to get to verse 21 because it talks about baptism and we're in churches of Christ, and we like that verse. But if you back up a little bit, especially to verse 19, he talks about preaching in prison the people who had not accepted the word or something along those lines. And so there are those who will relate that to, there are these people that have been waiting in Hades for however long, and Jesus at some point between his crucifixion and resurrection goes and preaches to those people. And that is one of the interpretations of 1 Peter 3. Now, if you have a great memory, and you'll remember back to when we studied 1 Peter 3, that's not what I think it's saying. Now, I know some of you have a great memory because some of you came up to me after that class and said, well, you're wrong about that. That is what it's saying. We had a lively discussion. But that is kind of a popular view. I don't think that Jesus personally, and again, you don't have to agree with this to be okay with God. You could be right and I could be wrong. But I don't think that Jesus went to Hades between the crucifixion and the resurrection and preached to people. And my main reason for thinking that way is if you look at Jesus, the one time he mentions something along those lines is the parable of Lazarus and the rich man. And the rich man begs, can you just send somebody to warn my family? And what we learn is there doesn't seem to be this other chance after you've been preached to kind of chance. And so it doesn't seem to jive with me between Jesus' teaching on earth that he would go there and do that. Now, could he have? Absolutely. Can I defend this 100%? No. And am I trying to convince you? No. That's just kind of where I'm at. So when I see Hades here, I think if you think that of 1 Peter 3, your natural inclination is to think it here. But I think there are other explanations for it. Secondly, if we look again at this verse, notice that it says he ascended. This clearly means that Christ also descended into our lowly world. That is the New Living Translation of that verse. And they have taken kind of a little extra ground that I probably wouldn't take to give you this case, which is it's the incarnation. And so their take is when it says he comes to this lowly place to earth, what he's talking about is incarnation, that Jesus came from heaven, and there couldn't be much more of a descending than heaven to earth, could there? And so he comes to earth, and the descending that goes on is there, and the ascending that will go on is his going back to heaven. John puts it similarly in John chapter 3, when it says that no one has ascended into heaven except the one who descended from heaven, the Son of Man. So this would be kind of a familiar language to them too. I tend to lean a little more here personally, but again, I'm not trying to convince you, just showing you what's there. Third, Pentecost. And this is also kind of a popular view among those who don't think Hades, which is that he has descended to earth through the form of the Spirit and what the Spirit does on Pentecost. And part of the reasoning behind this is we see Peter talk about that kind of thing within his sermon in the book of Acts. And we also see Paul multiple times, we won't list them all, but throughout Ephesians, really equating the work of the Spirit and the work of Jesus. And so Paul, in his own theology, seems to see the same things being done by both. And I can already tell by the looks on your faces, this doesn't matter to you. Sorry. But I didn't want to just leave it all out altogether. These are the three theories. You can do with them what you want. Any one of these, I think, is legit. And at the same time, you don't have to agree with any one of them, and I think you'll be okay with God. It's like my old Greek professor used to say, you don't have to speak Greek to get into heaven. You just won't understand what they're saying when you get there. You don't have to agree with this. It's okay. You can move on. So we'll move on to verse 10. He who descended is the one who also ascended far above all the heavens that he might fill all things. And I think this is the main point. Not what we think of the descending and the ascending. I think we all agree on ascending and that being a heavenly kind of thing. You can agree or disagree on the descending part, but the purpose of it is what matters. So what is his purpose in descending to earth? What is his purpose in descending through the Spirit? Or even if you think of the Hades version of it, what is his purpose in that? It's that he might fill all things. Jesus is going to fill everything within our world, especially, again, as Paul would say, through his Spirit. Spirit is here. The Spirit is everywhere. We've been talking about his fruit in class on Sunday mornings. We talked about his indwelling as we looked through the Spirit several weeks ago. Jesus has come to fill this world that needs to be filled with something different. Because our world is filled with all kinds of things that really don't do a lot of good when it comes to the work of God. And Jesus comes to fill it with something much better. Verse 11. And now he kind of changes gears from this ascending and descending and filling and the Spirit and all of those things into what the church looks like and how it is led. So in verse 11 he says this, he gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the shepherds, and the teachers. And so he gave all these different leaders within the church. There's a little bit of debate, again, on those last two, the shepherds and teachers, as to whether that's shepherds who are teachers or if those are two different groups. But he has all these different groups that are doing things. The apostles who bring the church kind of in its beginning stages and bring it along. And you've got prophets that some will take as people who actually had some kind of prophetic word from God, or some as just the ones who proclaim God. And at each stage, you have these different people who are leading the church to do something. And much like Jesus who descends, these leaders of the church are leading with purpose. It says they are to equip the saints for the work of ministry, for building up the body of Christ. So why are they leading? They're leading, first of all, to equip. And I love this language here in Ephesians 4, because if you are to be equipped, and you may be reminded back in chapter 2 and verse 10, that God is equipping us for good works that he has predesigned for us to do. This equipping is now continued by the leaders of the church, because what are you equipped for? Something you're going to do. Have you ever been equipped for something that you will never do? And maybe you've done that somewhere along the way. You bought something and you thought, well, I will do this and I will go. And when I was a youth minister, I've mentioned to you before, I took my youth group on a hiking trip. And I got these hiking things to go on this hiking trip. And I thought, hiking might be fun. Maybe I want to do this again sometime. Those things were used on that hiking trip and never again. Those things were borrowed by people that cared about hiking. I actually saw a meme this week that said, I don't know who needs to hear this, but happiness does not have to include hiking, and I was in full agreement. I bought all those things thinking, well, I'll do this, I'll use them somewhere along the way, and I never did. If you walk into my office this week, you will see on the shelves books and books and books and books and books. Took up 14 boxes when I moved them from Oregon here. I counted because I had to lift every one of them twice. And as I went through these books and books and books, I thought, some of these I have read and enjoyed. Some of these I have bought thinking I will read and enjoy these, and I have never read them and enjoyed them. Some of them I have bought thinking these will be a good resource along the way, and they were. And some of them I thought these will be a good resource along the way, and I'm still waiting for whatever that day is. I have tried to equip for various things, and sometimes I don't always get quite through the things I'm equipping for. God says part of the reason that we have these leaders within the church is to equip us. And then the second part of what he says in that verse is to encourage, to build up. And so we have these people, these apostles and prophets and evangelists and teachers and all of these things. We have them all here to help equip us and to encourage us to do good works. And then it gets on to us. It's not just about the leaders. There's something here for us too. Until we all attain to the unity of the faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God, to mature manhood, to the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ. So what is the purpose? He said he's given us these leaders, and they're equipping and they're encouraging us, and they're doing it for this purpose. Here's the reason why, and I think there's several of them here that we can look at and hopefully gain something from this morning. First of all, unity. He has equipped us for the purpose of unity. And we talked about that a little more in depth already, so we won't go a whole lot into that. But all of these things we will talk about this morning, there's an individual side to it, and we tend to get caught there. You hear language like Jesus as your personal Savior, or you hear language about your personal relationship with God, things like that. There is validity to all of that, but it's not just that. There's something more. There's always been this piece of Christianity, the major piece of it, that is intended to be done together, in unity with one another. And so in the beginning, they equip us for unity. And then for knowledge. We are to be people who are learning. And so we here as a church have lots of opportunities to be able to learn. We have Bible studies, we have Bible classes, we have sermons, and then hopefully we encourage you to realize that anything you're going to learn about, anything you're going to gain more knowledge about, generally is not done in 30 or 45 minutes a week. Generally, that's something you put a little more time into. I always look at Jason down here on the front row. I think, what if Jason with his horses, and if you've ever watched those on YouTube, it's fun to watch. What if Jason with his horses only took 45 minutes a week to train those horses? What would it be like? What if Jet in his training of horses? What if it was 45 minutes a week? What if you who are teachers or you who are students, what if you did that in 45 minutes a week? For to be honest with each other, we probably tried that during COVID, didn't we? Let's jam as much of this as we can into 45 minutes a week of watching videos and doing what feels like busy work and all that kind of stuff. And we have learned coming back from that, everybody's behind. They're doing all kinds of research about that right now, that teachers are struggling because the things you would have learned in third grade didn't work in 45 minutes a week. You couldn't jam it into that. Why would we think Christianity is any different? Why would we think if we gather here and hopefully pay attention, if he doesn't spend too much time on, was it Hades or whatever, hopefully pay attention for 45 minutes or 20 minutes or whatever it will be, that we're going to grow in knowledge. And so Paul says we are equipping to grow in knowledge. And then he says that we are equipping for maturity and for fullness. Maturity is to say that we are not the people that we were the first time we encountered the name Jesus, when we first came up out of the water. I would hope David at 2,000 is a little further along than Lily at 1, but I hope when Lily gets to 2,000, she's right where David's at, or maybe further. You know, we gain with all of that time as we go. And so we are maturing, we're changing, we're being different. And then part of that is this fullness that we will have. And remember, why did Jesus descend? To fill all things. And so part of that fullness, it's here, it's us. We are being filled. Then he continues on in verse 14. So that we may no longer be children tossed to and fro by the waves and carried about by every wind of doctrine, by human cunning, by craftiness in deceitful schemes. Now there's a lot we can unpack here. I don't want us to miss, by the way, the fact, and it's not part of our list, but craftiness and deceitful schemes means that there are people out there, or forces out there, if you want to think of Satan, who are plotting to make this more difficult for you. You know, when you think to yourself, why can't anything be easy? This is at least part of why. There are those who are plotting to make sure it is not easy. But what we are doing in the midst of that is being steady. We're no longer being like children tossed to and fro by the waves. We are being different. We are being steady within the storm. And part of that, I believe he's building here, a lot of that is that maturing, and a lot of that is the fullness that comes with that. I mentioned to you that I've been cleaning out things at my mom's apartment. I picked up a floor lamp that the base had broken on, I believe, in the move, and we had tried to figure out could anything be fixed on it. I don't think it could. And when I picked it up and the base fell off of it, I realized that the base of this floor lamp was filled with cement. It was literally cement inside this thing, which is probably why in the U-Haul trailer it didn't like that much and came apart at some point. And I thought, you know, this thing filled with cement, it's not going anywhere. You know, as we begin to be filled with the Spirit, filled with Christ, it's not because of how steady we are, it's because of how steady He is. And so for Him, when a storm comes along, it may knock us off our feet normally, but to Him, that's nothing. I mean, he created the winds and the waves. The storms don't bother Him. And so as we grow into that, we become more steady. And then in verse 15, rather, so instead of being tossed about by everything, rather, speaking the truth in love, we are to grow up in every way into Him who is the head, into Christ. So rather, we are to speak the truth in love. We mentioned last week or the week before in 1 Peter about being ready to give a reason for the hope, but doing that with gentleness and respect. I think this covers that to a degree, but it also covers the way we interact with one another. Are we speaking in love, or are we speaking in ways that are not love? There are probably people that I could mention to you. If I were to ask you, can you think of harsh voices in your life? You know, can you think of teachers that you loved and who were kind, and teachers who were harsh? I had a 5th grade teacher. I'm pretty sure she's gone now, so I can talk about her. But she used to grab kids by the ear. I'm sure this is probably not legal anymore. You'd be written up and fired, and there would be people tweeting about it and all that. But she would grab kids by the ear and like pull them out of their chair. I had a 1st grade teacher that got me on the knuckles with a ruler one time. This is what school used to be like, by the way. I had all these things, and when I have fond memories of teachers, would you believe it's neither of those? It's the 3rd grade teacher in between that was the most loving, kind person on the face of the earth, Miss Lucas. She was great. What about people in church? You've probably had that same kind of experience. People you just love to be around when it comes to church things, and as hard as it is to say, maybe people that you avoid a little bit when it comes to church things, and I think a lot of it roots back to this. Are we speaking to one another in love? Even things that are difficult to hear, even when the truth is hard for us, Are we doing that in love, or are we doing that harshly? And then beyond that, he talks about growing up. We are constantly having growth, and I don't know how to delineate between growth and maturing in this context. I really feel like he's emphasizing here. Remember when I said maturing just a minute ago? You need to be people who are growing. You need to be people who are not the same as you were a year ago or 10 years ago or maybe even a couple weeks ago. We need to be people that are constantly growing and being more of who he designed us to be. From whom? The whole body, verse 16, joined and held together by every joint from which it is equipped, when each part is working properly, makes the body grow so that it builds itself up in love. And before we get to the last couple points, to re-emphasize here the idea of unity that we started with, right here, joined and held together. This is not intended to be done on your own. This is not a solo project. And I think you will find, by the way, that some of the times this is most difficult is when you're trying to do it on your own. Some of the times it is so hard to get through something is when you decide, well, I'm just going to do this myself. And then it becomes kind of a disaster. So we are to be equipped for the purpose of equipping. Sounds like I'm talking in circles in there, but I promise I'm not. We are being equipped so that we can in turn equip others. Yes, the leaders of the church have a mandate from God to equip others, but so do we. We are to be people who are helping one another along to do better, to be more of who God designed us to be, to equip for good work. We are to be people, as hard as it is sometimes, to not always just do the job ourselves, but to try to bring people alongside us to do the job together. And I know for all of us, we have probably experienced some time where you've wanted to do that and it sounded good, but it's so much more difficult. It's be so much easier to just do this myself. And we are to equip one another to do these things. And then last of all, we are being equipped for work. He's echoing again here what he said in chapter 2 and verse 10. There is something we are to be doing. And all of this builds toward now, go out and do it. I have a friend that was in ministry for years and years and years. He retired recently. He used to end all of his articles with, now let's get to work. That was kind of his salutation, or his salutation at the end? I think that's right. Whatever's at the end. It's the thing at the end of the letter that I learned about from the third grade teacher. She would be mortified that I don't remember the word right now. But the thing that you end with, he would always end with, now let's get to work. And maybe that's how we should end. I know we always do the invitation, but maybe sometimes we should be reminded, when we leave here, now let's get to work. Let's be people who are going out and doing and being in our world. So this work that we do is one where we are encouraging each other, and for the second time he mentions love. We are speaking truth in love, but we are also building up, or I like to use encouraging in love. Are we trying to be people who are helping others to get better, who are helping others to be encouraged? Because most of us have so many things discouraging us already. Are we reminding one another of the good that we're doing? Are we reminding one another of the impact we're having on each other's lives? We are to be people who are encouraging in love. So this morning, I would imagine you probably saw this at the beginning and thought, well, this is about church growth. We're going to talk about how we get more people and all of that. I think, honestly, of all of the church growth programs and door knockings and gospel meetings and all that stuff that goes on, I think if we did Ephesians 4 well, the church would grow. I don't think people could stay away from something like this. Go to a place where they are speaking truth in love and encouraging in love. Why would you not want to do that? Go to a place where people are not stagnant, but they're growing. Go to a place where they stand for something, but do that in a loving way. That sounds like a pretty good thing. And so, yes, it is about church growth, but more than that, it's about our growth. We need to be people who are growing into who God's made us to be. Now, if you look at yourself this morning and you think, I'm kind of stuck in a rut and have been for a very long time, then maybe this is for you in that sense, to remind you to, okay, I need to get back up, I need to begin moving forward, and I need to be a better version of who I am today. Or maybe you have never come to him because you didn't know what it was all about. He is the God who descended from heaven to whichever version of that you think, because he loves you that much. And he is going to have us ascend with him to go back and live with him forever. You can be baptized into him. Your first communion can come right along too, and you can make your way toward 2000 and beyond. You can change your life today. Or if you need to come back to him because you have been discouraged for any number of reasons, know that there's a body here that wants to encourage you in love to walk with him again. If we can help you in some way, please come while we stand and sing.